don't know if Grambling can knock off Texas A&M. I'm going to be honest with you. It's going to be a tall task, but they must complete these three things if they even want to have a chance at coming out with the W. Oh, yeah. It's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me, making Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day, every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app today, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. We'll wrap up today's episode. Well, they look at Tarik Cohen in his second attempt at a return to the NFL. This time, he's been picked up by the New York Jets. That's kind of a Feature Friday segment. Prior to that, there are two schools who had a great time at D2 track and field national championships. It's Albany State and Lincoln of Missouri. But we kick it off with Grambling because today, I believe the game is at noon Central Time. Grambling will be attempting to knock off Texas A&M. By the time you've heard this, maybe it has happened, maybe it hasn't happened, right? Maybe the game is over, right? I don't know if they can do this. This is going to be an extremely tall task. This is something that won't be easy, and it'll take a lot out of them. But if it's going to happen, like I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. If it happens, I'll be just as surprised as the majority of the country. There's probably half of the Grambling fan base and a couple of HBCU supporters sprinkled around the country that believes that Grambling will win this game. I cannot include myself in that. I can be hopeful that they will. And in that hope, I've come up with a few things that they must do. These things are mandatory if they come out with a victory or they want to come out with a victory. I'm not saying that it will equal a victory, but if they don't do these three things, I can guarantee you that they will not win. First off, they need to play their best game of the season. You need to sit there and watch Grambling and say, man, I ain't seen y'all play like that at all this year. This is something really new. I'm unfamiliar with the efficiency. I'm unfamiliar with the defense. I'm unfamiliar with the athleticism. Like it almost needs to be all of the great things that you love about Grambling need to be amplified times 5, times 10, because I understand that there's 16 number one seeds in baseball, so maybe this can feel a tad bit devalued, right? Because in the NCAA baseball tournament, you have 16 regions to start off with, and every single region has a number one seed and has a host. So it could feel a tad bit devalued. I don't think that's truly fair, but even if you want to work with that logic, Texas A&M is not one of those number one seeds that you have devalued. If you went to the basketball format, because a lot of us, when it comes to a 64-team format, we're familiar with March Madness. So let's use that as a reference point. If we took all of these baseball teams and took all these number one seeds, Texas A&M would still be a number one seed. They have the second best odds to win the entire tournament. And Grambling's used to this. Grambling basketball went against Purdue. And Purdue made it all the way to the national championship. Did they win? No, but they did play that game. They were the runner-ups. And now you're looking at Texas A&M, who has the second best odds of any collegiate baseball team to win the College World Series. So this is not something that's unfamiliar. And maybe Coach Piercy even go talk to the basketball team, see how they were able to get over certain hurdles. And I know they didn't beat Purdue, but you can still take some experiences from that, right? But overall, you need to play your best game. So I don't want to sugarcoat it. I need to get that duh moment out the way. That may seem a little bit obvious, but sometimes the obvious needs to be said, because if you don't put it out in the air, you can forget the obvious. Grambling State must play their best game of the season if they want to knock off Texas A&M in the first game of the regional stage, right? And it's important to remember this is just the first stage. If this game goes poorly, honestly, it shouldn't be overly shocking. I hate to sound pessimistic about it, but to me, I'm being realistic about it. If this game goes poorly, I probably won't talk about it unless they play Louisiana. If they play Louisiana in that second round or at any point they play Louisiana, we'll definitely look at that. That being said, let's try to keep it up tempo. Let's try to keep it a little bit more positive and look at things that they must do. The second thing that Grambling needs to do if they want to win this game is they have to bat better. You cannot bat the way that you've batted in other big school games. If you look at Grambling from a conference or from a holistic seasonal standpoint, that kind of sounds crazy. When you look at what they've done and you see how they rank within the SWAC, to say that Grambling needs to bat better would be a little bit of a curious choice, because let's rattle off some of their numbers in rankings within the conference, not just conference play, but of all teams within the SWAC throughout the entirety of the season. That includes non-conference games, such as the big time games that they struggled in. So Grambling has the second most runs. They have the third best batting average. They have the third most home runs. They have a really good slug percentage, right? So when you see these things and understand that they've struggled throughout the year in certain games, you would say, oh, well, this struggle against Arkansas, I'm not going to beat around the bush because we're going to talk about the teams. This struggle against Arkansas, this struggle against LSU, they performed well enough to where that's an aberration. And it very well could be an aberration, but that aberration happened against the teams or the quality of team that you're about to face right now and the quality of teams that you're going to play in this entire regional stage. So I can't just write off, well, LSU was a bad game. Well, Arkansas was a bad game. Well, Texas A&M is in the SEC with Arkansas and LSU. Matter of fact, Texas A&M ended up being one of the highest ranked teams in the country. So if I've seen them against another high ranked team such as Arkansas, who I believe was either number 1 or number 2 in the nation at the time that they played, if I've seen you struggle against them and I've seen you struggle against LSU, I may just start to say that you struggle against these type of opponents, which isn't rare. This isn't groundbreaking. This isn't something that's never been seen before, but it's at our table right now. So we must address it. And we must address the fact that they only had 4 hits against Arkansas, 7 hits against LSU, 2 runs against LSU, one run against Arkansas. You can't do that. You can't. If you go in there and you have 2 runs, you are not going to hold Texas A&M to 1. I will eat my words. There are a couple of things that I will eat my words with. If Grambling holds Texas A&M to 1 run, I would be absolutely stunned, right? So if Texas A&M, if Grambling can win this game with 2 runs, and I don't think anybody believes that. I believe that's blind faith if you genuinely believe that Grambling with 2 runs could win this game. Against LSU, it was 2-26. Against Arkansas, it was 1-21, which brings me to my next point. You can't allow 20 runs. Even if you bat exceptionally, you can't allow 20 runs, because I don't believe that Grambling in a really good batting day, right? And I showed you all of the good stats. I left one of the poorer stats out, but whatever, because you got to avoid that anyway. Grambling in a really strong day at the plate. In a really strong day at the plate for Texas A&M, I'm taking Texas A&M. Texas A&M averages about 9 and some change as far as runs go per game. I think they're top 15, if I'm not mistaken. I don't want to give them the exact number and be wrong, so I'm going to say top 15 as a range in the nation as far as runs scored. So no, I don't believe that a good batting day from Texas A&M and a good batting day from Grambling goes the direction of the Tigers. I just don't. That's not advantageous. And remember, we're speaking about you have to do all of these things. You can't, first off, if you let up a bunch of runs, you're not playing the best game. So really, let's focus on these 2 things. You have to play exceptional. Here we go. This is the best way to put it. You can say you just have to play your best game of the season, and that's God's honest truth, right? But if you want to break down what that really means, it means you must bat well and you have to limit the runs, let's say between 7 to 12. And I've seen that from HBCUs this year. I've seen that with Prairie View. I've seen that with Texas Southern. PV faced Texas A&M and they lost 11-9. TSU allowed 7 runs and they only put up 4. So neither one of these schools won the game. But the point is, this is much closer. Look at Grambling's games against bigger schools, mainly LSU and Arkansas. It hasn't been pretty. It hasn't been close. If you want to give yourself a chance, try to get to 11. Maybe a really good batting day can get you to a 10, a 12. Maybe you try to hold them to 7. If you hold them to 7, I'm really going to be interested. And honestly, moral victories suck. I really don't like them. But you should probably feel pretty good if you hold Texas A&M to 7 runs, similar to how TSU did. Okay. Overall, Grambling, if you want to win, you basically have to play the opposite of how you did against Arkansas and LSU. I've seen you play well. I've definitely seen you play well. I don't know if we've seen you play well against competition of this level. We'll be back on Monday, hopefully to break down a positive baseball experience with the Grambling Tigers. But I don't know. These 3 things are going to have to happen. Really 2, and then summarize and combine them into 1. You got to bat better. You got to defend better. And overall, you just got to play your best game of the season in every attribute times 5. So let's push forward and look at some other people who rose to the occasion. And that's Albany State and Lincoln of Missouri at the D2 Track and Field National Championships. They rose to the occasion and had a couple of people who placed and medaled. And we'll look at those athletes as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime, and Gametime is the number 1 place for all of your last-minute ticket deals. Now, the Mavericks are in the NBA Finals. The Celtics are in the NBA Finals. I wonder if I just jinxed Dallas. I doubt it. Last time I looked, they were up like 25. So, but yeah, if you're in the Dallas area, the Stars are putting in work. If you're in the Dallas area, you got the Mavericks. And if you're in the Boston area, yeah, this game is over. You're in the Boston area, you got the Celtics. So whether it's basketball, whether it's hockey, maybe you're not even really a professional sports person. You just check out Locked On HBCU because you're an HBCU fan. That's okay. You can go to a concert. You can go to a theater play. You can go to a comedy show. And all of these different types of events and different genres. You have flash deals, priority deals, zone deals. You have random sales on a place that's already going to give you the cheapest price possible. So go ahead and download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege. You get $20 off your first purchase when you use the code LOCKEDONCollege. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day. Every day for your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today. It's the first of its kind, 24/7, all day, every day sports network on YouTube. So go to Locked On Sports Today and subscribe. The Division II Track and Field National Championships are in the book. We know that track and field season is coming to a close this next week, less than 7 days away now at this point. You'll be looking at the Division I Track and Field National Championships. But let's go to the D2 level and look at a couple of HBCUs who performed extremely well and ended up placing top 15 in the nation at this event. I want to start off by looking at Albany State, because Albany State is Albany State and Missouri. Albany State's men, Lincoln of Missouri's women team. So let's kick it off with Albany State, because you have Kilburn Moore and then you also have Ed Gilbert. Those are the moneymakers. When you look at it, Kilburn Moore and Ed Gilbert were the moneymakers for Albany State's number 1, or excuse me, Kilburn Moore and Ed Gilbert were the moneymakers for Albany State's entire team. But then also, so was the 100. So we're going to look at 2 different things. We're going to look at Moore. We're going to look at Gilbert as individuals and what they were able to do. But then we're also going to look at the 100-meter dash and its relatives and how that impacted Albany State's chances of, or not, their standing at the end of the day. So when you look at Moore, he ran a 10:13 in the 100-meter dash. Then you had Ed Gilbert, who finished 6th in the 100-meter dash. And just in general, I would say that the 100 meters is where they made their mark, which we're going to expand upon. But then you also have Moore, who landed in 3rd place in the 200, and Gilbert, who landed at 5th in the 200. So what you're already seeing, off rip, what you're seeing is Moore and Gilbert who are carrying the teams as individuals. And one thing you have to understand about track and field nationals is a lot of times, and this is something I just noticed, D2 HBCUs so much closer to the top of just achieving things than Division One HBCUs, significantly closer. It's different when you get to the tournament. You can see them actually win games. You can see them push forward. The lower you go in the subdivision, it feels like the more competitive HBCUs are. There's a lot of reasons for that, but the reason I bring it up is because this conversation never really happens with D1 HBCUs. I think North Carolina A&T made this a conversation a couple of years ago. But you look at Alabama State, which is Marion Stubbs. This is not going to be a conversation we have. We're going to talk about where did Stubbs land and what did he do, but we rarely talk about team success. This gives us an opportunity to do that. In these track and field national championships, how you achieve success as a team is by individual placements. They get you a certain amount of points, and those points all add up at the end of the championships. Then you decide who has the most points, and that's the ranking you have. For Albany State, they finished 9th, and it was all because of Ed Gilbert and Kilburn Moore. I told you this once. I'll tell you this again, right? The duo of Kilburn Moore and Ed Gilbert, combined with just the 100 meters in the 4x1, that is how Albany State made their points. Let's go through their placement again. Kilburn Moore had 3rd place in the 100. He had 3rd place in the 200, and that was 6 points apiece for both of those 3rd place finishes. So with that, you have 12 points. Then you look at Gilbert. Gilbert got 4 points for his 5th place, and then he got 3 points for his 6th place. So that gives him 7. So as individuals, Kilburn Moore got 12 points. Ed Gilbert got 7 points. That made together 19 points as an individual and that's 19 of the 24 that Albany State had as a team. Now you want to take a guess where the next 5 came from? Like I told you, the 4x1. And we'll break down this again. So if I'm just throwing a bunch of numbers at you, forgive me. But at the end, I'll make it a lot more concise so that you understand exactly what I mean. The 4x1, and you can guess who was there. Kilburn Moore and Ed Gilbert. They ran 2 legs apiece. Right now, I'm joking. But they also were joined by Javon Hutchinson, and then you also had Jordan Smith, who made up the end of those 2 or of that relay, the other 2 legs. So when you look at the 4x1 of Albany State, they placed 4th, which gave them 5 points, which was the entirety of the 24. And they're also the first HBCU 4x1 team to place 4th or better since 2019 when St. Augustine did it. So these are things you have to look at, things you have to consider, and things you have to just take in account, because overall, Albany State had 24 points. All 24 of those points, Gilbert and Moore were a part of. Every single one of those 24 points, whether it was the 100, the 200, or the 4x1, they made up all 24 of those points, along with their 2 running mates in the 4x1. Don't want to kind of skate out of giving them their credit. And then if you're just looking at the 100 in the 4x1, then you're looking at 14 of the 24. So either way, the money makers were the 100 meter, and they were the 4x1, or with 100 meter events. And then also Gilbert and Moore. Now you look at Lincoln, who, though they did have a guy competing the 400 meter hurdles, their women's team did much better. They finished in 13th, which was still top 15. And it was all about the 400 meter hurdles for the women. It was all about the 400 meters, period. You had Sherem Hamilton, and then you also had Odashina, what is the last name? Oh, excuse me. Sherem Hamilton is actually the guy. You had Odashia Nanton and Maria Diamond, who both competed in the 400 meter hurdles. And then they also competed in the 4x1 when you're looking at Nanton. So Nanton was 2nd in the 400 meter hurdles. Diamond was 4th in the 100 meter hurdles. That ended up being 13 points. The 4x4 was kind of crazy to me, because the 4x4 set the facility record in the semifinals. Then they came back and actually bettered that time, but they ended up 3rd. And unfortunately, you had a first place team who nearly set the Division II record all time, and they were about half a second off of that. So, yeah, this was a really good day for Lincoln because you had the women's show out, and then you also had Sherem Hamilton, who came in on the men's side at the 400-meter hurdles. But for the most part, you're looking at the Albany State men's track and field team, and then you're also looking at the Lincoln of Missouri, not Lincoln of Pennsylvania, but Lincoln of Missouri, their women's team and what they were able to do. But I want to take a quick look before we wrap up this Friday episode with a little bit of a feature Friday on Tarik Cohen, because he's trying to make another return. And I believe that the role that the New York Jets have for him makes it his best and possibly last chance to make that return to the NFL. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to keep this brief, but we're going to look at Tarik Cohen because I believe this is really his last chance to return to the NFL. And it sucks for a guy who was extremely dynamic. It sucks for a guy who, prior to his injuries, looked like he had a really bright future at least being a return man, at least being a scat back. Those guys don't typically get the awards, but they do get the memories, right? Like I look at a guy like Darren Sproles. I don't know. Let's look at how many all pros that Darren Sproles had in his career, right? Because I don't think it's much. But the point is, he's a Darren Sproles type of guy where Darren Sproles returned kicks. I can't remember how many he did once he began to become more part of an offense. Darren Sproles made 3 Pro Bowls in his career. 3 Pro Bowls. And I say this as a guy who he played for my Saints for 3 years. This guy was really good. Let me see what his return numbers were. If we can go into this. Let me see. Rushing and receiving. But the point is that Darren Sproles is the prototype for a player like Tarik Cohen. Did he never return kicks? Or am I just not finding it? Right now, that's not important because, here we go. In those Pro Bowl years that he had, it was when he returned kicks the best. But point being about Darren Sproles is that he's not a guy who's going to go into the Hall of Fame, but he'll be remembered. He'll be remembered as a legend more so for those who watched him than his accolades. And I think Tarik Cohen was on that way. He even had himself an All-Pro in his second year as a professional. But he has a strong memory here with many HBCU fans, and I can't blame them for the affinity that they have for Brother Cohen, because if you were there for his North Carolina A&C run, if you were there for his nearly 350 in the first Celebration Bowl and 3 touchdowns, it probably hits a lot different than just reading it and knowing that it happened, right? But Tarik Cohen has always been an explosive player. He's always been decorated on a collegiate level, and he was on his way to having a really good career in that role that I previously described. But unfortunately, injuries hit. He tore his ACL. Took him a little bit to get back. And when he was right about to get back, then he tore his Achilles. And it's like, he hasn't played a game since 2020. He was on the Carolina practice squad last year, and that was the closest he got. But he never actually hit the field. So he still hasn't played in a professional game in 4 years. For a player who was only a couple of years removed from being an all-pro guy, that's shocking. But injuries, injuries derail you, and you can't do anything about that. And that's exactly what happened with Cohen. However, now that he's with the Jets and we're looking at the changes in kick return rules, now I believe that if you were going to have a return, this would be the best way to do it. And if he still has it, these rules are more than likely here to stay. So basically, you're going to have 2 kick returners, and it's making that position a whole lot more valuable, not only as an individual, but the fact that you're probably going to want to have a couple of guys with kick return capabilities on your team. And this is what Robert Saleh, head coach of the New York Jets, said about Cohen. He said he's a playmaker. He's starting to get back healthy. With the new kickoff rules, these kick returners will touch the ball over 100 times a year, which is significant. At least that's what we are anticipating. And a guy like him, we are excited to have him aboard. When Cohen was with the Bears, game planning for him was a nightmare. So basically, now that you're going to have multiple returners, now that you're going to have returners touch the ball more, you want as many players with kickoff return capabilities. That's what I said, and that's what you see kind of echoed by Robert Saleh in probably not exact words, but that's what he's saying. These guys are more important. You got to have as many capable players as possible. And if he can come out and show that he still has a little something, people don't return to the house every time. He may not get a kickoff return touchdown in 2024. But if he can show that he still has a little bit of a burst, then maybe that gets somebody else to be interested in him as not only a returner, but then also as a scat back who receives the ball out of the backfield. I just believe that a role for him being a kickoff returner is his best way to show that he has immediate value. And I hope that he can show it with the New York Jets. We'll see it. We'll see it in preseason. So even if it's not with the Jets, it could be with somebody else. But this is the best way. And I think that he will play in an NFL game, or he'll play in a preseason. And if he plays well, he'll play in an NFL game. So I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. Next week, if I'm not mistaken, with it being the beginning of June, we're going to switch to a 3-day podcast format per week. So it'll be Monday, Wednesday, Friday every week. So be ready for episodes on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I'll try to do something in between to fulfill that Locked On HBCU thirst that I hopefully have already kind of made you quench, or not quench. This is what happens when I try to say cool stuff off the rip. Hopefully, anyway, I can quench the thirst that you hopefully have because you enjoy the show. That's the moral of the story. Hopefully, you enjoy the show so much that you want the little extra stuff that I throw out on Tuesday, Thursdays at times. But we're going to go Monday, Wednesday, Friday, most likely for full episodes. So I appreciate you. Come back Monday. Hopefully, we're able to break down a little bit of Grambling baseball and some good news about that. In the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care. Stay blessed. Peace.